We're certainly glad that you're here and appreciate everyone being in attendance this morning. Got a couple of prayer requests at the end of class, and then if you have any, make sure you get those handed in as well. But we are starting on chapter 1. We've been doing an introduction to Joshua, and we're going to be getting into chapter 1 today, and starting really the thrust of his whole journey into the land of Canaan. Greg Rice is going to lead our mind in prayer, and we will go ahead and get started. Amen. Thank you, Greg. You want to turn to Joshua chapter 1. We're going to get right into this. If you remember at the end of last week, we looked at how Deuteronomy leads right into chapter 1 of Joshua. And we were looking, the last couple of weeks, we were doing this introduction of looking at his background. And so we know that he was being prepared all this time. And when we get to chapter 1, we start to really get into the thrust of him taking over, taking the reins from it. And, we know it's a difficult thing to move into such a big position like this. And when you look at Joshua chapter 1 and verse 1, in fact, when you look at, this first chapter, we're actually going to kind of split between this week and next week, because chapter 1 deals with two different things, or kind of two different themes that are at play. One is God's charge to Joshua, and we see this in verses 1 through 9. And so this is what God is saying, okay, now Moses is gone, and you'll see this in verse 1. And so we see this whole charge from God for the first 9 verses. And then the second half, beginning in verse 10, is Joshua's answer to what God's charge was. And so, we see this correspondence right here between the two of them. And so we're going to get through God's charge to Joshua this morning. Next week, we'll look at Joshua and how he answered God and how he's stepping up to do what is said. There's something that was brought up last week, and if we have time today at the end of class, I want to hit that. I don't want to bring it up right now to get sidetracked, but it's not something that it's something that is important, and questions arise from it, and certainly we can address it. But if we get to that, we'll get to it either this week or next week. But see this in verse 1. So it's after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord, and that is and when you look at the authorship of Joshua, likely Joshua wrote Joshua. That's what my take is. We're not told exclusively or explicitly who wrote Joshua. Likely Joshua wrote some of it. Some of it could have been written by some of the other elders that were with him. With some of the things that we're dealing with later on in Joshua as well. But Joshua is likely, I should say, I'm not for sure, but Joshua likely wrote at least the first part of this. And it's possible that he wrote, I mentioned last week that, we were talking about the authorship of Deuteronomy, the end part of Deuteronomy. Did Moses write his own death? Well, he could have. He had inspiration. He was inspired, and God could have certainly told him. Another possible theory for that, and I'm not going to dispute this, is that Joshua possibly wrote the end part of that because he was with him going into Joshua. Does that shake our faith by any means? Absolutely not. We know what happened, right? And so I hold to the Moses part of that, but if you hold to that Joshua might have done some writing, then that's fine too. But he says, after the death of Moses, the servant of the Lord. it came to pass that the Lord spoke to Joshua, the son of Nun, Moses' assistant, saying, Moses, my servant. And that's the second time at the beginning of this book that Moses is listed as his servant. That is such an important thing that he is being remembered for. Moses, my servant, is dead. And now therefore arise and go over this Jordan, you and all this people, to the land which I am giving to them, the children of Israel. And so, Joshua obviously had the knowledge that, here it is. We've been going all this way. And now this is finally the point where he is going to step up and he's going to step into these shoes, and he's the one that's going to take these people. And where Moses left off, Joshua's going to take him the rest of the way. I was thinking about this a little bit earlier, how interesting it was, for Joshua to step in. And, do you think it was easy for him? It couldn't have been. I mean, there's, no matter how prepared you are, I think there's certain times when you're stepping into a leadership position where it is really a difficult thing to do. And, I think the easiest comparison to make, other than, maybe a job or something that a boss is, stepping up into that, but you look at in the spiritual sense, you look at, an eldership. And someone who is brand new to that eldership. Jim, when you first became an elder, how easy was it? When you first became an elder, when you first stepped into that position, the very first time you became an elder, was it easy just to step right in and fill those shoes?
No, it's still not.
And it's still, it really is, it can be a daunting task, can it? That is, you think about that. The first time that you step into that and realize, okay, now there are decisions that you didn't have to make before. There are things that you're going to deal with. Now all of a sudden you're dealing with, 100 personalities or however many, there are in the congregation, all these different personalities, and you're making decisions, you're calling shots, and you're overseeing things that you did not see before. And how, that can't be easy.
Up until this time, since youth, Joshua's been an aide to Moses since youth. And he's been pretty much everywhere throughout Exodus. He was there.
Right.
He was able to go further. But then Moses went into the cloud and he stood outside the cloud. Moses went into the tent, but he stood outside the tent. So there was always, God was that close, but he never had the face-to-face with him. If you know where I'm going with this again.
Right. There's that term face-to-face, there's actually something that, if we get to it, we'll discuss that. But, you're right in that, he was always really close. He's the one that went up to the mountain with Moses. He's the one that was always with Moses. And so he obviously knew and had that mentorship from Moses. And so you think, well, he should have been well prepared and he was. But still, there are things that Moses did that Joshua hadn't done yet.
One more thing in there just dawned on me just as you were saying there. Moses renamed him from Hosea to Joshua.
That's actually kind of in the Hebrew. There's a variation of that. Yeah, it's with those names. And the names mean something. When every name, when you look at it in the Old Testament, there's a definition that usually corresponds with it, and there's a reason why they're renaming them. Joshua had the knowledge. He witnessed all that happened in the wilderness wanderings. Here's a man who he saw everything. He saw the triumphs. He went through the defeats. He saw, and every time Moses talked about the people murmuring, remember all the times they murmured against him because they just mad because they didn't have all the food they thought they should have had. They thought it was so difficult, and they even to the extent that they said, why don't we, at least we had all this back in Egypt. Why don't we just go back there? You're bringing us out into this wilderness, and we're going to die out here. And so Joshua was privy to all of these different things. He saw the heart of, all these people and the frustration that they had, the setbacks that they had, the triumphs that they had. He saw it all firsthand. And he was very close to Moses. And I wonder if he and, Moses, because we're not given all the records of it, but we know how close Moses and Joshua were, and they must have had conversations about this. It helps when someone, especially when someone in a leadership position, to have someone else there that they really can talk to and that they can confide in And I wonder if Joshua was that man, that Moses was, that he helped him. I mean, he certainly encouraged him. But think of those conversations that they may have had. We don't want to say for sure, but we know they had a good relationship. And we know they talked. And we know that Joshua was with him so many times. There was a reason Moses trusted him so much to go up onto that mountain with him. There was a reason that Moses trusted him to be the leader of all these Israelite people, over the military, and when they face certain battles. It helps to have someone that you can trust that much, doesn't it? That when things get tough and things go sideways sometimes, that there is that person that you can confide in, and that was Joshua. But now Moses is dead. Now what happens? Because Joshua was always with him. And you think, even Joshua, going through all of these different things, and it must have been tough. How difficult it must have been for Joshua and Caleb to come back when they were spies 40 years prior to this, looking at that land, trusting God, and saying, yes, we can do this. And that's exactly what Caleb said, wasn't he? Caleb said, let us go up at once because we can overtake them, because God is with us. And how frustrating it must have been for Joshua and Caleb when 10 other people said, no, we can't. We don't have it in us. They're too strong for us. Joshua must have been so frustrated at that point. Warren, did you have your hand up? No. Okay, I didn't know now. Okay. I'm waiting for it, so. But now Moses is gone. And now Joshua is the one that's going to be doing this. He's the one that's going to be in charge. He's the one that's going to be leading these people. He's the one that can lead them into it. And so he's got this huge responsibility in front of him to do all of this. He is now the Moses who's going to lead these people. And now he's the one that's going to have to win their trust. And he's the one that's going to have to deal with their personalities. And he's the one that's going to have to deal with the murmurings or the setbacks or the, when they second guess themselves of whether or not they can do it. And how hard it was. Is when you look at the end of Deuteronomy and you look at the first part of this, how hard it, to know that the people were weeping for Moses. And Joshua was one of them, I'm sure. But when you look at Deuteronomy 34:8, it says the children of Israel wept for Moses in the plains of Moab 30 days. And so the days of weeping and mourning for Moses ended. So Moses dies, they mourn for him 30 days. It's interesting, Jacob was mourned for 70 days. So they did this, the way that they would do is they'd have a period of mourning back then. And they would say, okay, we're going to mourn for him this, so many days. And they would think about him, and then when that ended, they would, do you think they ever stopped missing him, though, beyond those 30 days? No. We do the same thing today, don't we? We have where there's some sort of closure when we lose a close loved one or someone that's just really close to us and we trust and we look to them for guidance or we just appreciate their wisdom, and then they pass away and we say, okay, and you go through, the shock of it sometimes and you grieve, and then the memorial comes, and it's usually pretty close to, the death. But the memorial comes and everyone's together and you are thankful for everyone being there. And you're thankful for, that people sharing different thoughts and so forth. And there's a sense of closure to that. But that memorial doesn't stop. That grieving does not stop. I've talked to so many people beyond, who've lost loved ones like that, especially spouses. And there comes a point where everyone that's there, all the people that are there at the memorial, all the people that have been sending cards, all the people that have been praying, all the people that come up, and you certainly appreciate that, there comes a point where you're going to be sitting in your house alone. Or there's going to be a point where you're alone and you're going to realize none of these people are around. Now, they're there for you, but that's when it really hits you when they're gone. And I have a feeling that's what it was like. Joshua, these people mourned for Moses. They looked to him as this leader. But the 30 days came and went, and now, what are they going to do? Now it was Joshua's turn. But you notice with how the Lord connects this, though, with this writing, when he inspires this writing, he mentions Moses at the top of this twice as the servant of God. He was a servant, and that's exactly how he would be remembered. Isn't that interesting? It wasn't, okay, Moses did all these great things, except for that one time when he failed me, and that's why he wasn't coming into the promised land. He was known as a servant of God. That's how he was going to be remembered. And that was his legacy. When you look at, hold your place right there. Look over at Hebrews chapter 3. Hebrews chapter 3, verse 5. The writer said, Moses indeed was faithful in all his house as a servant for a testimony of those things which would be spoken afterward. This was his legacy. This is how Moses was going to be remembered. And this was the man that Joshua was going to have to replace. But what a great thing it is to be a servant when you start looking at the kind of man Moses was, the kind of man Joshua hoped that he would be. In Galatians chapter 1, verse 10, Paul writes, do I now persuade men or God? Or do I seek to please men? For if I still please men, I would not be a bondservant of Christ. That's what we are to be, are servants of God. You look at Moses, and what a great example he is for all of us to see just how he led and the obstacles that he had to overcome. And we're going to have, we'll have our own obstacles. We might not be leading thousands upon thousands upon thousands of people, but we're going to have our own struggles. We're going to have our own challenges, and it's going to define us with how we deal with it. We're to be servants of God. Moses wanted to please God. You think about it. All the times these people murmured against God, Moses could have gone right along with them. In fact, Moses asked God on a couple of occasions. He says, why do you bring us out here, right? Why? He says, you need to take care of us. You need to take care of these people so they don't do this to you. And, you had these interactions with God, but that needs to be our motivation. We need to be servants of God and look to him, look for these ways to please God and trust him enough that he is going to get us through whatever comes. And it's easier said than done, isn't it? It's easy to sit in a classroom like this or in a worship service Sunday morning and have all our Christian friends here, and the moment we go out of those doors, though, the world's going to hit us. We get hit with those bills. We get hit with all these different challenges and situations that we may not have seen before. And how do we deal with it? We can nod our heads and say, oh, yeah, we're going to trust God. Oh, yeah, absolutely, God's first in my life, and I'm just going to get through it. But do we really do it? And that's what's going to define us as what kind of servants we are of his.
If you kind of look at a different way a little bit, as parents, we are servants of God in that we are training our children.
Absolutely.
So that's something that you can count on.
And that's a great way to really serve him, is to make sure our families are built up. That's what, we're starting this series today, next hour, on building up a godly home. And that is, parents really have a big, big responsibility.
And beyond the parents, it's the children, it's the grandchildren, it's the
Right.
great-grandchildren.
Which you know about. So,
I do know about these things.
so this huge responsibility is laid on Joshua. And it's not just standing up physically, like we see in verse 2. He has to put the people in the right direction. And it's not just about Joshua. It's about all of the children of Israel. So it's time for Joshua to step up. He sees everything that was happening in the wilderness. He knew Moses' plan. He knew everything going in to Canaan, that was going to be their final destination, that is where they were trying to get. And the people are ready to enter their destination. And you see in verse 2, how God tells him, arise and go over this Jordan. That word arise, it means stand up. In other words, God's telling Joshua, you have been preparing, you've been training, and now is the time to get to work. All of this time, all of this training, all of this preparation has led up to this point. He says, arise, because now's the time. How amazing that was for Joshua. What a defining moment for Joshua. You think that's it's the same kind of situation when you become a Christian. You've been doing the training, you've been doing the studying, you've looked at all the different verses, you've looked at what the Bible has to say about being added to the Lord's kingdom. All that preparation, and then you're baptized. And that's when God says, now's the time to get to work. That's when it all starts. Sad that some people don't even get to that point. But our road to heaven is just beginning when we get baptized. Now we have work to do. Now it's time to go make other disciples. Now it's trying to win the lost and get other people to understand the way that you did. God's telling him, now it's time to go over this Jordan. He's now the one to steer the people in the right direction. And you think, who's going to go over that Jordan today? Who's going to be the one to do that? And it's like, it's like Doris said. I mean, we've got our homes and our parents. We've got the classrooms. That's how we're going to have to help other people and encourage them and train them up to do the same thing. Because they either are or they're not going to follow God. And then we get to verse 3, and it says, every place that the sole of your foot will tread, I have given you, as I said to Moses. So Joshua has the same promise and the same assurity. God tells him everything that was going to be for Moses is now for you. From the wilderness in this Lebanon, as far as the great river, the river Euphrates, all the land of the Hittites, and to the great sea, toward the going down of, what's the great sea? Mediterranean. Toward the going down of the sun shall be your territory. And no man shall be able to stand before you all the days of your life. And as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. And I will not leave you nor forsake you. That was, that must have given him hope. Because going into something like this is not, it's not going to be a walk in the park. He's going to have the challenges, and not only is he going to have the spiritual challenges of leading all these people and the leadership challenges of leading all these people, but now all those warring tribes, all those warring people that they reported 40 years prior to this, they're getting about ready to face them now. All those people, because Canaan had these, they had these warriors and these different families, these different groups, the Girgashites and the Hittites and the Jebusites, and they were bred for war. And they were about ready to face them. And what do? How do you go in? What's your mindset going into a situation like that, knowing Moses is not with us now? Joshua's thinking, now it's me. I've got to do this. But God said, I will not leave you nor forsake you. When you look at verse 3, it reaffirms the promise given to Moses and those who were before him. Remember that this goes all the way back to Deuteronomy chapter 11. And if you want to turn there, you can, but really kind of reiterating everything. In Deuteronomy 11:24, every place whereon the soles of your feet shall tread shall be yours. From the wilderness in Lebanon, from the river Euphrates, even unto the uttermost sea shall your coast be. And there shall be no man be able to stand before you, for the Lord your God shall lay the fear of you and the dread of you upon all the land that ye shall tread upon, as he hath said unto you. So that's what God tells Moses. And now Joshua takes over, and God said, you know what? Everything I told Moses is now on you. You're the one that's going to go in there and fight these people now. You're the one that's going to go in. And he said, When he says, it's interesting right here with Moses as well. He says, he shall lay the fear of you and dread of you upon all the land. Later on, the first part when they get to Jericho, that's exactly what happens. That's when they really start to see that God really is with them the way he said. Because there is no reason, there's no way they should have been able to conquer a town like Jericho. And we'll get to that when we get to chapter 6. But that's, how easy is it for us to say, well, I can't do something? We probably have said that so many times in our lives, right? I can't do that. I can't. And we just sell ourselves short until we realize we can. I can't do that. And how many times is that, no matter how many times we've prayed, we just say, well, in the back of our mind, we're just thinking, well, I can't do that. I'll pray about it, but I can't do that. Folks, if we give it up to God, we've got to give the whole thing up to God. When we pray to face whatever might be in front of us, I can't doubt. I can't put it in God's lap or give it to him and then say, no, but I'm not going to do it, because that's not really giving it to him. It's not going to be easy. It seldom is. But we need to give it to God. And we need to realize what he can do. When we say, when we pray to God and I say, well, I can't do this, are we saying, well, God can't do this? We know God can do it, right? What we're doing is we're almost selling him short when we say that. Because if I say, well, I pray to him and I say, well, I just can't do this, so I just probably won't. In essence, I'm saying, well, God can't do it. Or you're just putting it onto someone else. We can't be biased in how we see things. When you look at Philippians 4:13, Paul says, I can do all things through Christ which strengthens me. That means I can literally, physically do anything that I want to do? No. Say that again? Not without preparation. But there's a spiritual context right there as well, isn't it? That I can do all things through Christ. That means if it's within what he has given his will already for me to do. And he strengthens me. Paul's talking about the Lord's will, not about his own preference. I can't just say, well, God's just going to help me do this, and this is what I want, and I want to succeed and be popular or famous or powerful or whatever.
I had a question about strength there. So this is one thing about this one verse that I don't get. So it says, be strong and very courageous and be careful to obey. Now, I can understand how I can be careful to obey, and I think I understand what it means to be very courageous. What does being strong mean? Or is that too esoteric for this particular group? Because I can understand, given the commands, you do those.
Right.
Don't be afraid, have courage. You're afraid, but you go for it anyway.
Right.
What does it mean for me to be strong?
I would say it's talking about spiritual strength right there. Because physically I don't have to be super strong to be spiritually strong. But that's where, how strong is my faith? Trusting God, that really God can take care of me. And I think one plays into the next. If I'm spiritually strong, my courage is certainly going to grow with that. And so, God's always, you look through the whole New Testament, you look through the Old Testament and what these guys are going through with Joshua and all the Israelites, but you look through the New Testament and what those early Christians were going through as well, and the apostles and all the disciples, and even beyond that. And the only thing that really was getting them through anything, to have the courage to do that, was their spiritual strength. You look at Peter. Peter wrote to these people being persecuted. He knew they were going to be persecuted. They're the people that knew, if I stay as a Christ follower, I could die. Well, what drove him to keep doing that? What drove him because Christianity really was relatively new by that point. And they were remember, before they became Christians, what were they following? Judaism. And that was a tradition that had gone back over 1,000 years. So what was so strong in them that compelled them to say, you know what? I'm still gonna follow Christ. Because they knew Paul was able to, and Peter and the other apostles were able to really, I think, pound into them the hope that really did come with being a Christian. When you realize that, I mean, it is, how can it not strengthen your faith when you start thinking about heaven and not thinking about now? Because, I mean, sometimes we get so impulsive, don't we? We are so impulsive. We think impulsively. We think, how's it going to affect me right now? It's hurting me right now. And that's where, it is really time to step up and trust God. It's easy it's easy to trust God when nothing's bad's happening to me. When everything's going good, we can say, well, I thank God. And I know some people say, well, they forget about God when things are going well. Yes, but when things are bad, if our first instinct is not to pray to him, we've already taken him out of the equation. Our very first thing we ought to do in anything should be to turn to God. Doesn't make the problem go away. We can ask God providentially that hopefully we'll get, that this will go. But that's, I think, is what, this talking about was, with this strength. And are you talking about verse 6? Be strong, good courage. For to this people you shall divide as an inheritance the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Because here's what it means. And here's why it can't mean, well, I don't think it means physical strength right here in verse 6 of Joshua 1. Because, like I said, there's no way. I mean, they're going in and they are facing just people who are bred to fight. They're strong. They have weapons. They have all these, their cities are fortified. And God's saying, I want you to go in and take it. He says, so you've got to be strong. But it's the message that's always been taught to them. It's the message that they failed at 40 years prior to this when 10 spies came back and said, nope, because that wasn't strong. Joshua and Caleb were. They said, let's go in and do it. There's courage there, isn't there? But why did they say they could go in and do it? Because God's with us. That's strength. Knowing who's on your side. And so he says, be strong, good courage, for to this people you shall divide as an inheritance the land which I swore to their fathers to give them. Only be strong and very courageous, that you may observe to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. And do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, that you may prosper wherever you go. That's a good question. How do we remain strong? If this is spiritual strength, how do we stay strong? What's going to keep us going? Something has to.
Believe in God, the faith in God.
Okay. How is that going to enable them, though? How are they going to stay strong? I mean, faith in God, absolutely. They had to know God's with us. But what was going to define them as being strong? Well, he says right here. That's going to lead to courage. But he says, only be strong and very courageous, that you may observe, here it is right here, that you may observe to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you. You follow the law. Remember, the law had been given, right? Moses had gone up, he'd come down, he's given them this law, and there were a lot of laws to keep, but they had them. And so there's this book of the law that was given to the people, or provided for the people by God. And God said, there is the standard. You follow that, and I'm going to be with you. Isn't that the same today?
Yes.
Every time I open this book, if I follow what the teachings are of God, he's going to be with me. Is he going to move? No. But can I move from him?
Yes.
Sure. I stopped following the words of this book, and I've moved away from him. God's not going to force me to come back to him. He's not going to force me to behave a certain way. He's not going to force me to respond. He doesn't force anyone to respond. But he said, here's my word, and you can either take it or not. But he says, if you take it, I'm going to be with you. You take it, you're going to be, you'll be with me. And that's what those people, the people had to understand that as well. He says, be courageous that you may observe to do according to all the law which Moses my servant commanded you, and do not turn from it to the right hand or to the left, that you may prosper wherever you go. Joshua knew that he had work to do, but he knew God wasn't going to forsake him. And he knew God wasn't going to forsake him because God told him he wasn't going to forsake him, and that was good enough for Joshua. He knew who God was, and he knew, based on what he had experienced, that, that God doesn't break his promise. He was always going to lead these people, but he wasn't going to force them. If he forced them and they didn't have a choice in this, he could have taken care of this 40 years prior to this. But he said, nope, this was your choice. And because of your choice, there are going to be consequences. There was no room for excuses. He knew the task, and he understood the Lord's assurance. This was a pivotal time for these people, now that Moses was gone. And he couldn't just say, okay, well, one of these days, Lord, I'm just going to follow you. You ever hear that? I've had Bible studies with people, or have asked people if they want to study, and they'll say, well, I'm just not ready yet. But one of these days, I'm going to be ready, right? When Paul faced, who was in front of him, well, you almost convinced me to be a Christian. Maybe one of these days. What happens when that day doesn't come? I mean, I would hate to think of what one of those days would be without, if that day would never got here. I remember, and most of you probably do too, with Dan Basham. And I know some of you remember it because I'm not the only one who studied with him. I know some of you had too. And what was his, what did he keep saying? Well, someday I'm just not ready now. I don't feel worthy right now. I hope to do that at some point. And he had to get to that point where he realized, you know what, I got to stop doing this. And thankfully he did. We can't, there's going to come a day where that, those excuses and putting it off and putting it off and putting it off, there's no more putting it off. We take our last breath in this life and we've sealed our fate. And there's nothing more that we could do. Nothing. Could God have destroyed their enemy without entering? When they came back and they said, well, look at this. We've got the Hittites and the Jebusites and all these people that are standing there in front of Canaan. Could God have destroyed all those enemies without them even setting foot in there? Absolutely. He had the power to do it. But he wasn't going to do that. That's not what God was about with him. The promise of conquering the land was not unconditional. He said, if you follow me and you go in there, then it's going to happen. That's why we need to encourage people to be strong servants for the Lord. I want to hit these last two verses and then we'll have our prayer requests, our prayer announcements. We get to verse 8 and 9, and this is the last of what God charged Joshua with. This book of the law shall not depart from your mouth, but you shall meditate in it day and night, that you may observe to do according to all that is written in it, for then you will make your way prosperous. And then you will have good success, and have I not commanded you? Be strong, and there it is again, be strong and of good courage. Do not be afraid nor be dismayed, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. In order to be prosperous, Joshua would need to keep the law. That was what's going to keep him in God's good graces. That's what was going to fulfill God's promise. You just preach it or teach it even to children, and you don't live it. How do you think your influence is going to be? Because kids aren't stupid, and they're not blind, and they see if the person teaching them is really living what they're teaching.
see, monkey do.
That's it. They're going to emulate that. They're going to see it. Joshua did everything that he preached. He was a participant in the battles. He followed God. He participated in the work to be done. We need to be participants and not just visitors who show up with their name in the directory. We have a job to do. We're the ones that are setting the, that are going to influence the young people and the non-believers and even other believers. You're going to be looked at in some way by someone. And, that is what is going to define you as a servant of God. So that's the charge that God gives to Joshua. Next week, we're going to look at the latter part of this chapter of how Joshua's answered God. And hopefully I can get to what I was hoping to at the end of today, but we'll hold that off, and I think that'll actually be a good one to go along with that first chapter towards the end to kind of sum it up and see where Joshua was.